There is a room you have never entered. Not because you were unqualified, not because you were excluded, and not because you were overlooked, but because you were not meant to be there yet. Some rooms do not require presence to be effective. They require timing. They require alignment. They require distance. This room does not operate on effort. It operates on authority. While you lived your life in the visible world, handling responsibilities, carrying uncertainty, questioning whether your consistency mattered, decisions were being formed elsewhere. Not hypotheticals, not possibilities, decisions. Quiet, precise, deliberate. You were not invited because invitation would have implied negotiation. What happened there did not require your defense, your explanation, or your persuasion. Your absence was not a disadvantage. It was the condition that allowed your name to carry weight. You assume influence happens only where you stand physically, but the most consequential shifts occur where presence would interfere. Had you been there, emotion might have spoken louder than truth. Anxiety might have diluted clarity. Your history of striving might have tempted you to over-explain who you are. Instead, your name spoke without interruption. That matters. When a name is spoken in a room like this, it is not casual. It is not conversational. It is deliberate. A name spoken there represents identity distilled, your record, your endurance, your restraint, your consistency compressed into a single reference. No embellishment, no apology, just recognition. You did not hear it. You did not feel it immediately. And that was intentional. Awareness too early would have changed how you carried yourself. You might have tightened your grip on outcomes. You might have started watching for signs, measuring timelines, anticipating results. That would have disrupted the stillness required for what followed. So you were kept unaware, not in darkness, but in insulation. This room does not reward ambition. It responds to readiness. It does not elevate those who push their way in. It acknowledges those whose lives already demonstrate capacity without announcement. That is why your name reached it before you ever did. Think about how many times you felt unseen, how often you assumed your effort vanished into nothing, how many moments you considered whether staying disciplined without recognition was foolish. Those moments were not wasted. They were observed, not emotionally, but structurally. They revealed who you are when no one is watching. That is what qualifies a name for that room. You were not discussed because you demanded attention. You were referenced because you had become undeniable. The room itself is not mystical. It is functional. It exists wherever decisions of consequence are made without noise, where outcomes are determined before announcements, where movement begins long before evidence appears. And in that space, your name was spoken not as a question, but as a conclusion. This is why you felt an unexplainable shift before anything changed outwardly. A subtle easing, a quiet confidence, a sense that panic no longer fit the way it once did. Those were not emotions, they were aftershocks. Something had already moved. You were not late. You were not forgotten. You were not waiting your turn. You were being positioned so that when your name entered that room, it would not be debated. And now that it has been spoken, nothing requires your presence to continue unfolding. What began without you will arrive to you. What was decided without your defense will manifest without your force. This is how influence works at its highest level. You do not enter the room. The room responds to your name. You were not present in that room for a reason, and it has nothing to do with distance, worth, or access. Presence would have weakened what absence protected. There are moments where being seen interferes with being chosen. This was one of them. If you had been there, you would have tried to participate. Even silently, your awareness would have shaped your posture. You might have tried to anticipate outcomes, to interpret expressions, to read between lines. You would have carried the weight of expectation into a space that required neutrality. That is why you were kept outside of it. Your absence was strategic. Some rooms are not entered through doors, they are entered through evidence. Your life had already provided what was needed. Your patterns spoke. Your endurance testified. Your restraint answered questions before they were ever asked. Nothing further was required from you. You were not invited because nothing about this was provisional. An invitation implies contingency. It implies discussion, persuasion, uncertainty. What occurred in that room was not uncertain. It was confirmatory. The absence of your presence allowed the conversation to remain clean, free from emotional bias, urgency, or explanation. Your name carried the information without distortion. This is difficult to accept because you were conditioned to believe that opportunity requires proximity, that you must be visible, vocal, and present to be considered. But proximity often triggers performance, and performance weakens authority. Authority does not need to be present to be felt. It only needs to be consistent. You had already demonstrated consistency in places that offered no advantage. You showed up where no one would reward you. You stayed disciplined where no one would notice if you slipped. That kind of consistency cannot be staged in a room. It must be lived over time. That is why you were not there. The room did not need your confidence. It needed your record. You may struggle with the idea that something so significant could happen without your awareness. It challenges the belief that control equals safety, but control would have compromised the outcome. The moment you try to manage a process meant to unfold beyond you, you introduce friction. So you were protected from knowing, not because you were excluded, but because knowing too early would have changed how you moved. You would have rushed. You would have adjusted your behavior. You would have begun performing toward an outcome instead of remaining aligned with it. Silence preserved integrity. There are people who enter rooms constantly and never leave a mark. And there are others whose names move rooms without them ever stepping inside. You are learning the difference now. The room you were not in was not a test you failed to attend. It was a confirmation you had already passed. Your absence did not delay anything. It accelerated it. Because no one had to wonder who you were, explain why you mattered, or debate whether you were ready. All of that had already been settled long before the conversation began. You were not overlooked. You were already known. And when a name is already known, presence becomes unnecessary. There was a precise moment when your name entered that room. Not as background noise, not as a possibility. It was spoken with intention, the way names are spoken when they already carry context. No one asked who you were. No one needed clarification. The sound of your name did not invite discussion. It settled it. This matters more than you realize. When a name is spoken in a space like that, it is never detached from history. It carries a record, not a resume of achievements, but a ledger of choices. How you responded when things did not work, how you behaved when you were not rewarded, how you handled pressure without an audience. That record traveled with your name into that room. You were not represented by someone else. You were represented by who you have consistently been. There is a difference. In many places, names are spoken to test reactions, to see who agrees, to measure resistance. This was not that kind of moment. Your name did not float. It landed. It arrived already weighted, already formed, already understood. That is why you did not feel excitement when it happened. You felt calm later. Excitement belongs to uncertainty. Calm belongs to inevitability. You may have spent years trying to articulate who you are, to make yourself understood, to be seen accurately, to explain your intent. In that room, none of that was necessary. Your name was not being introduced. It was being acknowledged. Acknowledgement is different from attention. Attention can be withdrawn. Acknowledgement cannot. This is also why comparison never entered the room with you. Your name was not weighed against another. It was not ranked. It was not positioned within a hierarchy of worth. It was placed where it belonged based on alignment, not competition. You were not chosen over someone. You were chosen for something. And that distinction changes everything. When your name was spoken, it did not require defense. There was no need to justify timing, background, or process. The qualities that mattered were already evident: steadiness, reliability, restraint, follow-through. These do not need explanation. They are self-evident to those who know how to recognize them. You may not see yourself this way yet. That is understandable. You have lived close to your own effort. You remember the doubt, the fatigue, the moments of questioning. But distance reveals pattern. And from that distance, your pattern was clear. This is why the speaking of your name did not trigger delay. It triggered movement. Something about you reached a threshold where acknowledgement became necessary. Not because you demanded it, but because ignoring it would have been inaccurate. That is what happens when consistency compounds quietly. Eventually, it becomes impossible to overlook without violating truth. You did not feel a surge when this happened because it did not depend on your awareness. It depended on your alignment. Awareness will come later as confirmation, not as cause. Right now, understand this. Your name was spoken as a conclusion, not a question. It was spoken because it belonged in that room before you ever knew the room existed. It was spoken because the work had already been done in places no one saw. And from that moment forward, things did not need to be pushed. They only needed to unfold. What was spoken, they did not require your presence to continue. It only required your name. And your name was enough. When your name was spoken, it did not echo into emptiness. It was heard. That matters. Not everyone who speaks in that room is listening, and not everyone who listens understands what they hear. But in this moment, the audience mattered more than the words. There are rooms where names are spoken casually, tossed into conversation, tested for reaction. This was not one of those rooms. The ones listening were not curious, they were attentive. Not skeptical, they were discerning. They did not listen for excitement. They listened for stability. Your name did not need to be defended because the listeners recognized what it carried. They were not impressed by ambition. They were not persuaded by charm. They were not moved by urgency. Those things are loud, and loud things are easy to manipulate. What they listen for is coherence, whether a person's internal structure matches the weight of what is being discussed. And when your name was spoken, it matched. The listeners in that room are not swayed by emotion. They are shaped by consequence. Every decision they make ripples outward, affecting timelines, resources, people far beyond that space. Because of that, they do not gamble on instability. They respond to patterns that have proven themselves under pressure. That is why your history mattered more than your potential. Potential excites, history reassures. They listened for evidence of restraint, for signs that you do not fracture under strain, for proof that you can hold responsibility without turning it into identity. Your name carried those answers without explanation. This is also why no one rushed to speak after your name was said. Silence followed, not hesitation, but acknowledgement. The kind of silence that occurs when nothing more needs to be added, when clarity settles the room instead of debate. You were not being evaluated in that moment. You were being recognized. Recognition shifts dynamics immediately. Once it happens, the room adjusts. Conversations reorganize. Priorities reorder. What was once theoretical becomes actionable. The listeners did not need to announce this shift. They moved accordingly. This is important. Not everyone who heard your name will ever meet you. Their role is not proximity, it is positioning. They influence outcomes, not relationships. Their response was not emotional, it was procedural. And procedures, once set, continue without constant attention. You did not feel this because it was not meant to be felt yet. Awareness would have created anticipation. Anticipation would have pulled you out of alignment. So the effect registered quietly, through the easing of resistance, through the softening of obstacles, through the sense that things were no longer pushing back the way they used to. Those were the listeners responding. They did not need to reach out. They did not need to signal approval. They did not need to involve you. Their listening was enough to set things in motion. This is why you may soon notice people responding differently without knowing why. Decisions landing more cleanly. Delays dissolving without explanation. Doors opening that you did not knock on. These are not coincidences. They are downstream effects of attention given in a room you were never meant to enter. The listeners heard what they needed. They adjusted accordingly. And now the adjustment is moving toward you. You did not need to speak. You did not need to be present. You did not need to be known personally. Your name carried everything required. And once it was heard by the right ears, the path forward no longer needed your defense, only your continued alignment. This did not happen because you pushed for it. That is the part your mind keeps trying to reverse engineer. You replay your recent actions, your words, your choices, searching for the moment you made it happen. You won't find one, because effort was not the trigger. Alignment was. What moved things forward was not a surge of activity, but a steady absence of resistance. There were seasons when you worked harder than this and nothing shifted. Seasons when you prayed more intensely, planned more aggressively, explained yourself more thoroughly, and still doors stayed closed. That contrast matters. It proves something important. Force was never the missing ingredient. You did not earn this by striving. You allowed it by stabilizing. This room responds to those who stop interfering with their own progress. When anxiety quiets, clarity becomes audible. When urgency fades, timing aligns. When you stop trying to prove readiness, readiness becomes obvious. Your recent stillness mattered more than you know. You stopped chasing validation. You stopped reacting to every delay as if it were a verdict. You stopped adjusting your identity to fit expectations. These were not passive choices. They were disciplined withdrawals from noise, and that withdrawal created space for something else to move. Effort often creates turbulence. Alignment creates traction. That is why this happened without you knowing. The moment you stopped watching for outcomes, outcomes found room to move. The moment you released the need to be seen, your name could be spoken without distortion. The moment you let go of control, influence entered. This is difficult to accept because you were taught that reward follows exertion. But this kind of movement follows coherence. When your inner world stops pulling against itself, external systems respond naturally. Friction disappears not because the path is easier, but because you are no longer misaligned with it. You did not convince anyone. You did not persuade anything. You did not manifest this through intensity. You simply became consistent enough that your name carried authority on its own. That is why this feels quiet now. There is no adrenaline rush, no rush of validation. There is just a sense of inevitability settling in. Things feel less dramatic, more orderly, less chaotic, more precise. That is the signature of alignment. If effort had caused this, you would feel exhausted. If force had caused this, you would feel defensive. If ambition had caused this, you would feel exposed. Instead, you feel grounded. That grounding is what allowed your name to move without you. It prevented emotional interference. It kept the conversation clean. It ensured that what was spoken could not be undone by second-guessing or overcorrection. You didn't arrive late. You arrived clear. And clarity moves faster than effort ever could. What unfolds next will follow the same pattern. Less pushing, less noise, more response. You will notice that things begin to meet you where you are, instead of requiring you to reach for them. This is the reward of alignment. Movement without struggle, progress without panic, recognition without exposure. And it all happened because you stopped trying to make it happen. The moment your name was spoken, something shifted that did not wait for explanation. Decisions did not pause to be reviewed. Momentum did not need to be negotiated. Movement began immediately, not outwardly visible, but internally irreversible. This is how things change when readiness has already been proven. There was no announcement because announcements invite resistance. There was no celebration because celebration invites scrutiny. Instead, there was recalibration. Priorities adjusted. Sequences reordered. What had been waiting quietly moved forward without drawing attention to itself. You did not feel this as excitement. You felt it as release. Pressure you had grown used to carrying began to loosen. The constant sense of pushing uphill eased. Tasks that once felt heavy no longer demanded the same effort. Not because they vanished, but because the weight behind them shifted. This is the first sign that something has changed. Effort begins to produce return. Before, you worked hard just to maintain position. Progress felt temporary, easily reversed. Now, forward movement holds. Even small steps stay where they land. That is not coincidence. It is structural support arriving beneath you. What changed immediately was not circumstance, it was resistance. Invisible barriers dissolved. Delays that had no clear cause began to thin out. Conversations that once stalled started moving forward naturally. Timing aligned without you needing to manage it. None of this felt dramatic enough to announce, but all of it was significant enough to notice. This is the kind of shift that feels almost suspicious because it lacks friction. You may find yourself wondering why things feel smoother, why decisions take less emotional energy, why your focus holds longer without fatigue. These are not mood changes. They are environmental responses to an unseen decision already in motion. Something that was holding space for delay has been removed. This also explains why certain anxieties lost their intensity without explanation. Fear often feeds on uncertainty. When uncertainty collapses, fear weakens. You didn't defeat it. You outgrew its fuel source. Now, clarity has more room. This does not mean everything resolves at once. It means resolution is now possible without forcing it. You are no longer trying to extract progress from resistance. Progress is beginning to meet you halfway. Notice how your instincts feel sharper but calmer. You are less reactive, more selective. You sense when to move and when to wait without spiraling into doubt. That is not intuition suddenly appearing. It is alignment removing interference. You are now operating from a quieter center. This is why you must not rush the next phase. Momentum that arrives quietly is easily disrupted by urgency. Trust what is unfolding without demanding proof. The absence of noise is not absence of movement, it is evidence of precision. What changed immediately was not what you see. It was how easily things can now move toward you. And once movement begins at this level, it does not reverse. It does not need to be defended. It continues because the conditions that once slowed it no longer exist. This is the moment you begin to feel carried instead of pushing. Not because you stopped effort, but because effort finally has somewhere to land. You felt it before you could explain it. That subtle change in your internal weather. The way certain thoughts no longer circled endlessly. The way urgency softened into awareness. You didn't connect it to anything specific at first because there was no event to point to. Nothing happened outwardly. And yet, something had already happened. This is how internal confirmation works. Your system registered the shift before your mind could assign meaning to it. Your body recognized safety before your thoughts caught up. The signal arrived quietly, as signals of alignment always do. Not as excitement, not as fear, but as a strange sense of steadiness that didn't depend on circumstances. You may have mistaken it for relief, or for tiredness, or for resignation. It was none of those. It was recognition. When something moves in your favor at a foundational level, your inner world adjusts first. Your nervous system stops bracing. Your attention loosens its grip on worst-case scenarios. You stop scanning constantly for what might go wrong. This happens before logic, before belief, before proof. That is why you felt it without knowing why. You didn't wake up thinking something has changed. You woke up thinking, I can breathe a little easier. That distinction matters. Your mind looks for reasons. Your system responds to reality. The reality had already shifted. This is also why the feeling was easy to dismiss. It didn't demand attention. It didn't insist on interpretation. It simply settled in. And because you have lived so long under tension, calm felt unfamiliar. You may have questioned it, even mistrusted it, wondered if it would last. That doubt is understandable. But notice this, the calm didn't disappear when problems showed up. It didn't collapse under pressure. It didn't require reassurance. It stayed, quietly, firmly, like something underneath you had stabilized. That is not emotional fluctuation. That is internal alignment. You felt it before you knew it because knowing too soon would have altered your posture. You would have leaned forward. You would have anticipated outcomes. You would have started measuring time. That kind of awareness pulls you out of the present. It reintroduces tension. So awareness came later. Feeling came first. This is the order of things when movement is real. Your inner confirmation did not arrive to excite you. It arrived to prepare you, to signal that you no longer needed to guard yourself the way you once did, to let you release habits built for uncertainty. That is why certain worries began to feel unnecessary. That is why some fears lost urgency. That is why silence began to feel supportive instead of threatening. You are not imagining this. Your internal response was accurate because it was responding to something already in motion. By the time your mind asks questions, the answer has already begun to arrive. Trust the order, feeling first, understanding later, evidence last. That is how you know this is not wishful thinking. It is alignment revealing itself quietly, exactly when you were ready to sense it without trying to control it. There are decisions that are never offered for your approval. not because you lack agency, but because the moment for choice has already passed. This is one of them. What unfolded did not pause to ask whether you were ready to decide. It moved because readiness had already been demonstrated. You were not consulted because consultation implies uncertainty. Some outcomes are decided when consistency reaches a threshold, when reliability becomes pattern, when behavior answers questions before they are asked. At that point, choice gives way to consequence, not as punishment, but as progression. You did not miss a decision. You became the decision. This is difficult to accept because you were taught that important moments require your conscious participation. That choice equals power, but true authority operates differently. It recognizes alignment and moves accordingly. It does not ask for permission from what is already prepared. Your life had been answering the question long before the room spoke your name. Every time you stayed steady instead of reactive. Every time you chose clarity over comfort. Every time you continued without applause. Those were not neutral moments. They were votes cast quietly, consistently, irreversibly. By the time the decision occurred, the outcome was already clear. Asking you would have been redundant. This is why there was no internal debate when it happened. No tension. No sense of being overridden. Your system did not resist because it recognized itself in the direction chosen. Alignment removes internal conflict. You were not bypassed. You were confirmed. There is also relief in this, even if you haven't named it yet. Relief from the pressure of choosing correctly. Relief from the fear of making the wrong move and losing everything. That burden has lifted because the path forward no longer depends on perfect decisions. It depends on continued alignment. That is a profound shift. You are no longer standing at a crossroads wondering which way to go. You are already moving on a path that has traction. Your role now is not to decide the destination, but to remain coherent as the journey continues. This does not remove your agency. It refines it. You still choose, but your choices now operate within alignment instead of anxiety. You are no longer deciding who to be. You are expressing who you already are. That reduces friction. It increases clarity. It quiets fear. Some people resist this stage because it feels like loss of control. In truth, it is the release of unnecessary control. You are no longer required to manage outcomes that have already been set in motion. Your energy is freed to focus on presence, discernment, and timing. That is why this decision feels strangely peaceful. It did not need your approval, because it was already in agreement with you. And what comes next will continue the same way, not through pressure, not through force, not through constant decision-making, but through alignment expressing itself step by step. You will recognize the path not by how dramatic it feels, but by how little it fights you. This is what happens when readiness speaks louder than choice. You were not asked because you were already aligned. You were not consulted because the answer was already yes. You were not delayed because there was nothing left to prove. And now you move forward, not as someone waiting to decide, but as someone whose direction has already been confirmed. What happened next did not ask for your attention. It didn't interrupt your routine or announce itself with urgency. It simply continued, quietly, efficiently. Because once a direction is set at that level, it does not require constant reinforcement. It requires alignment to remain uninterrupted. This is where many misunderstand how real movement works. They expect change to feel dramatic, to demand response, to create immediate contrast. But the most consequential shifts feel almost ordinary at first. They blend into your life so seamlessly that you only recognize them in hindsight, when you realize how much no longer resists you. This is the phase you are in now. You may notice that certain delays simply stop appearing, not because everything suddenly accelerates, but because unnecessary friction has been removed. What used to take effort now takes timing. What used to require explanation now requires presence. Things begin to meet you instead of forcing you to pursue them. This is not coincidence. It is consequence. Once a decision is made without opposition, it carries forward with quiet authority. It does not need to be defended. It does not need to be justified repeatedly. It simply expresses itself through circumstance. That is why this stage feels subtle. Your role now is not to interfere. There is a temptation here to do more, to push harder, to capitalize quickly before something changes. That impulse comes from old conditioning, from years of learning that if you don't act fast, opportunities disappear. But this movement does not disappear when you pause. It stabilizes. Speed is not required. Accuracy is. You may notice yourself becoming more selective without trying, less available to distractions, less willing to engage in conversations that lead nowhere, less interested in outcomes that once felt urgent. This is not loss of ambition. It is refinement of direction. Your attention is narrowing because alignment demands focus. This is also why certain options that look attractive on the surface no longer hold your interest. They would pull you sideways. They would dilute momentum. You sense that instinctively now, without analysis. That instinct is not fear, it is calibration. Trust it. At this stage, the greatest risk is not failure, it is interference. Interference comes in many forms: overthinking, over-planning, over-explaining, over-exposing. Each of these introduces noise into a process that is already moving cleanly. Resist the urge to narrate what is happening. Let it remain unspoken while it solidifies. Silence protects momentum. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. What was set in motion is still unfolding, and it does not need your supervision. It needs your steadiness, your continued alignment, your willingness to move when prompted and remain still when not. This is a different kind of trust than you are used to. It is not trust in a future outcome. It is trust in a present process. You do not need to see where this is going yet. Clarity will arrive when movement requires it. For now, what matters is that resistance has been removed and direction has been set. Let it carry you. This phase is not about acceleration. It is about continuity. And continuity is what ensures that what has begun will arrive fully, without collapse, without reversal, without strain. Before you misunderstand what is unfolding, there is something that must be made clear. What is moving toward you now is not designed to elevate your image, inflate your identity, or rearrange your life into something unrecognizable. If that were the purpose, the movement would have been louder and far more fragile. This is not about spectacle. It is about placement. You are not being pulled out of your life. You are being positioned more accurately within it. Many people assume that when unseen decisions turn in their favor, everything must change at once: status, pace, surroundings, relationships. But sudden external shifts often collapse because the internal structure cannot sustain them. That is not what is happening here. What is unfolding is meant to fit you. It will not demand that you become someone else to carry it. It will not require you to abandon your grounding, your discipline, or your sense of proportion. In fact, those things are the reason it can arrive safely. This movement is corrective, not disruptive. It corrects imbalance. It corrects misplacement. It corrects the long season where effort and return were misaligned. It brings your output back into proportion with your capacity. That is why it feels stabilizing rather than overwhelming. If you were expecting something dramatic, you might miss it at first. Because what changes first is not what you have, it is how efficiently what you have begins to work. Time stretches instead of compressing. Energy recovers instead of depleting. Focus sharpens instead of scattering. These are not small changes. They are foundational ones. This is why nothing flashy was promised. Flash attracts attention before stability is established, and attention too early invites interference. What is arriving does not need validation. It needs continuity. You may notice that your days begin to feel less crowded, even if your responsibilities remain the same. That is not coincidence. You are no longer fighting against invisible resistance. Effort now moves forward instead of dispersing sideways. That is the real gain. This also explains why you are not being rushed. There is no urgency to prove, announce, or secure anything. What is moving toward you does not evaporate if you take a breath. It strengthens. Rushing now would reintroduce imbalance. You are being taught something subtle but essential. Sustainability matters more than speed. Growth that endures is built quietly. It integrates into your life instead of interrupting it. That is why this does not feel like escape. It feels like alignment. You are not being rescued from your circumstances. Your circumstances are being reorganized around your steadiness. That distinction matters. Rescue creates dependency. Alignment creates authority, and authority does not need to hurry. What you are stepping into will feel almost understated at first, until you realize how much strain has been removed, how many decisions no longer cost you emotional energy, how often clarity arrives without effort. That is when you will understand nothing was missing before except alignment. And now that alignment is here, everything else can follow without force. What comes with this placement is responsibility, but not the kind you have known before, not the weight of carrying everything alone, not the pressure of proving you deserve what you hold. This responsibility is quieter, steadier, and far more precise. It does not arrive as burden. It arrives as awareness. You begin to sense that your choices now travel farther than they used to, that small decisions echo, that how you move matters more than how fast you move. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to steady you. Responsibility at this level is not about restriction. It is about containment. What is forming around you needs structure to remain intact. Without structure, even good things unravel. Without boundaries, momentum scatters. So this responsibility exists to protect what is unfolding from excess, distortion, and misuse. You are not being watched. You are being trusted. That distinction changes everything. You will notice that your tolerance for disorder diminishes. Certain inefficiencies begin to irritate you, not because you are becoming rigid, but because you are becoming precise. You see clearly now where energy leaks, where time is wasted, where compromise would quietly weaken what is being built. This is not perfectionism. This is stewardship. You are learning to care for what you carry before it fully arrives, to maintain internal order so that external order can follow. This is why you may feel more selective lately, about commitments, conversations, even thoughts. You are not closing off. You are refining. Refinement is how responsibility expresses itself before results are visible. There is also a shift in how you relate to effort. You are no longer willing to grind for outcomes that do not compound. You are less impressed by urgency and more attentive to sustainability. You understand now that what drains you eventually diminishes everything connected to you. That understanding is part of the responsibility. It keeps you from overextending. It keeps you from chasing. It keeps you from confusing motion with progress. Some people will misinterpret this shift. They may think you have become distant or guarded. In reality, you have become intentional. You are no longer available to everything because you are committed to something specific, even if you cannot fully name it yet. You do not owe explanations here. Responsibility also clarifies relationships. You begin to see who respects your boundaries and who resents them, who understands pacing and who demands access. This information is not given to create division. It is given to create stability. Not everyone is meant to walk with you at this level of coherence. That is not judgment. It is alignment. You will also feel a stronger internal check when something is misaligned. A quiet resistance. A sense of no that does not need justification. That is not intuition becoming louder. It is noise falling away. This responsibility does not ask you to do more. It asks you to do less more accurately. Less reaction. Less explanation. Less urgency. More presence. More discernment. More restraint. Restraint is not limitation here. It is preservation. What you are carrying now does not need to be forced forward. It needs to be held steadily so it can take shape without fracture. That is why responsibility arrived before the full expression of what is coming. You are being trusted with continuity, and that trust is not given lightly. It is given because you have already shown, over time, without witnesses, that you know how to hold weight without letting it change who you are. This responsibility fits you. It does not overwhelm you. It stabilizes you. And through that stability, what has been set in motion will arrive intact. You will begin to notice it in the way people respond to you before they ever say a word about it. Something in their posture shifts, their tone adjusts. Conversations pause slightly when you speak, not out of obligation, but out of attention. This is not because you are demanding space. It is because you are holding it. Recognition rarely announces itself. It reveals itself through behavior. You may find that people listen more carefully now, even when you say less. That questions come to you without you positioning yourself as the one with answers. That decisions begin to orbit your presence instead of bypassing it. This is not influence you chased. It is influence that recognized coherence. People sense when someone is no longer internally divided. Before, others may have felt your effort, your urgency, your trying. Even when they respected you, they sensed tension. Now they sense steadiness. And steadiness changes how people respond instinctively. They relax, they defer, they wait. This does not mean everyone will move closer. Some will, others will pull back. Those who lean in are responding to clarity. They feel that you can hold weight without reacting, without panicking, without collapsing under expectation. That makes you safe to trust with responsibility, information, and opportunity. Those who pull away are responding to contrast. Your presence will highlight misalignment without you saying anything. It will quietly reflect uncertainty, inconsistency, or unpreparedness in others. That reflection can be uncomfortable. Not everyone wants to be seen clearly. This is not something to manage. You are not responsible for how others process your coherence. Your task is not to soften yourself so others feel comfortable. Comfort is not the goal. Accuracy is. You may notice that some people attempt to re-engage with you differently than before. They approach with more formality, more care, sometimes even hesitation. This is not distance, it is recalibration. They are adjusting to the fact that the old dynamics no longer apply. Let them adjust. Do not rush to reassure. Do not downplay your steadiness. Do not re-enter old patterns to preserve familiarity. Familiarity built on imbalance will eventually cost you alignment. There will also be moments when recognition comes without explanation, an opportunity offered, a decision made in your favor, a door opened without negotiation. Resist the urge to question whether you deserve it. That internal questioning belongs to an earlier phase. You are not being elevated arbitrarily. You are being responded to accurately. Recognition is not a reward. It is a response to consistency. As this continues, be mindful of one thing. Recognition does not require expansion of availability. You do not need to be everywhere. You do not need to be everything to everyone. In fact, overexposure would weaken what is forming. Presence gains weight through selectivity. Allow yourself to be seen without becoming accessible to everything that sees you. Influence remains clean when access is intentional. This is not withdrawal, it is discernment. You will feel the difference when it happens. Interactions will feel less draining. Conversations will feel more purposeful. Engagement will feel mutual instead of extractive. This is how you know recognition is real. It does not exhaust you, it steadies you. Let responses change. Let dynamics adjust. Let recognition unfold without commentary. You do not need to announce who you are becoming. Your presence is already communicating it. Not everyone will come with you, and some will leave without a word. This is not rejection. It is realignment. When your internal structure changes, the external connections that depended on the old structure can no longer hold in the same way. Distance begins quietly. It shows up as delayed responses, shorter conversations, fewer shared references, nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just a gradual loosening. You may sense it before it becomes obvious, an intuition that certain relationships are no longer synchronized with your pace or direction. Do not rush to fix this. What is happening is not relational failure. It is relational sorting. Some people were connected to your effort, not your stability. They understood you when you were navigating uncertainty, seeking reassurance, or carrying visible strain. That version of you allowed certain dynamics to exist. Advice given without being asked. Influence exercised without resistance. Familiarity built on imbalance. As that strain leaves you, those dynamics lose their footing. This can feel uncomfortable, especially if loyalty matters deeply to you. You may feel an impulse to explain yourself, to reassure others that you are still the same, to shrink your clarity so the connection remains intact. Resist that impulse. Connection that requires contraction will eventually cost you alignment. You are not required to make others comfortable with your growth. Comfort is not the measure of correctness. Coherence is. Some will interpret your steadiness as distance. Some will interpret your boundaries as rejection. Some will interpret your silence as withdrawal. Let them. You do not owe access to everyone who once had proximity. Proximity was season-specific. Alignment is not. There is also a subtler grief here, one you may not immediately recognize. The grief of realizing that some people loved the version of you that was surviving more than the version of you that is stable. That realization can sting. Allow it to pass through without turning it into self-doubt. Their response does not define your direction. As separation happens, notice how your energy begins to conserve itself. Fewer emotional explanations, less managing of expectations, less anticipation of others' reactions. This is not isolation. This is efficiency. Your system is learning what it costs to carry unnecessary connection. At the same time, you may notice new connections forming quietly, not dramatic entrances, not instant intimacy, just a sense of mutual recognition. Conversations that feel grounded from the start, interactions that do not require performance. These connections arrive without effort because they resonate with where you are now, not where you were. Quality replaces quantity here. This phase teaches discernment without bitterness. You are not cutting people off. You are allowing distance where alignment no longer exists. There is a difference. One is reactive, the other is respectful. Do not chase what is fading. Do not cling to what no longer fits. Do not apologize for evolving. You are not abandoning anyone. You are responding to truth. Separation is not the end of belonging. It is the refinement of it. What remains will feel lighter, clearer, more reciprocal. What arrives next will not require you to explain who you are becoming. They will recognize it. This is not loneliness. It is precision. And precision is necessary for what is coming next. What begins to shift next will not be loud or public. It will settle first into the spaces closest to you, the places that have absorbed your stress without ever asking for it. Your home, your inner circle, the environments that learned your tension by living alongside it. Peace moves there before it moves anywhere else. You may not announce a change. You may not even be fully aware it has begun. But the atmosphere softens. Conversations lose their edge. Silence feels less heavy. The background hum of pressure that once lingered in the room begins to quiet. This is not coincidence. It is transmission. When internal stability forms, it radiates outward. Your nervous system regulates, and the spaces you occupy respond. Stability is contagious in the same way anxiety once was. What you carry internally sets the emotional temperature around you. This is why those closest to you may feel relief without understanding why. They may sleep better, speak more freely, react less defensively, not because problems vanished, but because the pressure surrounding them did. You were carrying more than your share before. Now that weight is redistributing. Practical things begin to change too. Decisions feel clearer. Planning feels possible instead of overwhelming. Resources stretch further, not because abundance suddenly appeared, but because panic no longer drives choices. Waste recedes. Urgency dissolves. Order replaces reaction. Provision often arrives as structure before it arrives as increase. You may notice that you are no longer compensating for everyone else. You stop filling gaps automatically. And interestingly, others begin to step forward. Not because you demanded it, but because your steadiness created space for balance. This is how systems heal, not through control, through regulation. Be gentle in this phase. Do not rush transformation. Let peace establish itself quietly. Let routines adjust without force. Let trust rebuild where long seasons of strain once lived. Healing within a household is subtle, repetitive, and deeply effective. You are also modeling something powerful now, without words. You are showing how to carry responsibility without fear, how to lead without tension, how to be present without being overwhelmed. Those around you learn from this even if they never articulate it. That is influence at its purest. This shift may reveal where peace has been absent for a long time. You may become aware of old patterns, arguments that repeat, anxieties that linger, habits formed around scarcity. Awareness is not accusation. It is invitation. These things surface because the environment is now safe enough to address them. Do not take this personally. Take it seriously. What stabilizes in you becomes shelter for others. What calms in you creates safety around you. This is not accidental. What was spoken about you was never meant to end with you. It was meant to strengthen what you are connected to. You are not just receiving something. You are becoming a place where others can rest. That is one of the clearest confirmations that what is unfolding is real. It may be a sense to pause something you assumed you needed to rush, a nudge to simplify instead of expand, a quiet prompting to step forward where you would normally hesitate or to wait where you would normally push. The instruction will be specific, but not complex. Simplicity is the signal. You are not being given a full map. You are being given one clear step. This is intentional. Acting too far ahead would reintroduce pressure. Alignment moves incrementally, not impulsively. When this instruction comes, you may feel the urge to consult others immediately, to explain it, to validate it, to gather agreement. Be careful here. Not every instruction is meant to be processed externally. Some clarity loses its shape when exposed too soon. This is one of those moments. If you feel pressured, wait. If you feel grounded, listen. You may also hesitate because the instruction feels too small to matter, too subtle to be significant. You might think, surely this can't be the next step. But major shifts often begin with unremarkable obedience. Precision does not announce itself. What matters is not how impressive the instruction sounds. What matters is how deeply it aligns. Once you follow it, gently, deliberately, you will notice something immediate. Not fireworks, not instant results, but flow. Conversations move, timing synchronizes. Resistance eases without explanation. Things respond in ways you could not have engineered. That response is confirmation. This phase is about trust rather than acceleration, about honoring subtlety instead of chasing certainty. You have already proven you can endure silence. Now you are learning how to move from silence. What comes next does not depend on how fast you act. It depends on how accurately you listen. The instruction will come. You will recognize it. And when you move, it will not feel like a leap into the unknown. It will feel like stepping onto ground that has already been prepared.